Hello. Welcome to Local Authors. My name is Marcia Clark, and we have with us Mark Braun, and he has written a very interesting account, Chicago's North Shore Shipwrecks. Hello, Mark.
Hi.
I'm happy to have you here.
Glad to be here.
You know, I wouldn't normally have gravitated to this kind of book, but once I started reading it, I was amazed of all the different stories involved with shipwrecks.
Well, yeah, a lot of people don't realize that you look out on Lake Michigan and you know, it's like any other large body of water. There have been, big ore freighters and everything else, and there's always, the earlier days, the stress of weather and whatever that created problems. And, particularly locally, we have no clue that these events even went on, which is sort of why I got into doing something.
Oh, yes. Tell me, how did you get interested in doing this to begin with?
I read a couple of books about shipwrecks, but they always talked about, for instance, the Lady Elgin, which is the Titanic now. They call it the Titanic of the Great Lakes. But you'd read that. They have a lighthouse in Evanston. You go, well, they wouldn't have put a lighthouse unless there had been some type of trouble. So what was it? And at the time, I was working on my master's degree, and it was in English, and I had to write a fiction piece and a nonfiction piece. So I wrote a lengthy article, and from that developed the book, which was published at the same time I actually received my master's. And obviously doing the research and whatever was the fascinating part about it. The research to me is much more fascinating than the actual sitting down and writing it. The writing, it's just simply retelling what happened.
Sure.
It's just
the research.
It's interesting to find out what happened.
Well, as long as we are talking about Lady Elgin, this one interests me a lot because so many lives were lost, 350 lives or something like that, right?
Right, yeah. The Lady Elgin had, this is the, yeah, okay. The Lady Elgin was this picture, by the way, is an interesting picture because it was actually taken the night before the accident occurred. This picture that is on right now. The Lady Elgin was a passenger and cargo vessel owned by Gordon Hubbard of Hubbard Cave fame. It was heading north from Chicago to Milwaukee, and was in a collision with a schooner. The storm hit, and at the same time, and the Lady Elgin was built like a big cavern, so when the water started coming in, it created air pressure, and it literally blew the ship apart. And the horror on the Lady Elgin is that the people, actually, most of the people were saved because they were on the upper deck. So when the boat exploded, they were already safe on that upper, and they floated to shore. It was September, the water was still relatively warm, but when they got to shore, the waves were so great that literally within 100 yards, 50 yards from shore, they were swept off the wreckage. The wreckage was broken apart in the tremendous waves, and most of the people, 350, were lost. Men, women, and children that were there.
I understand some of them grabbed onto parts of the ship and...
Well, they were actually on top of bits and pieces of the wreckage.
Yeah.
And managed to make it 100 yards, 50 yards from shore, and the horror that the newspaper reporters, not that the ship sank, but that the people were so helpless to rescue them, these people so close to shore. And there used to be a graveyard on the southeast corner of Fort Sheridan of those that had landed from the Lady Elgin there. That graveyard was then moved, I want to say a half day, and then moved those bodies, about 100 of them or so, were then moved to Milwaukee where they were going. The Chicago area, the Cook County end of the dead, which were more, there were about 200 of those, they were laid out. Those that could be identified immediately were then loaded onto the train and taken to Milwaukee. Those they had to make further identification with were taken to the Chicago morgue and then.
Amazing, it really is. And the life-saving station, when was it, Northwestern Life-Saving Station? When did
the
that come in?
Northwestern University Life-Saving Service. That came about as part of a overall effort to provide some safety for mariners. But the difference in Illinois, the difference in our area was that
There's a picture on right now,
instead, well, the difference is that these were actual students at Northwestern University. And this particular crew that is pictured there, the man holding his hand on the lifeboat there is Lawrence Oscar Lawson, and he was actually the professor. And all the rest of those guys are students. And their claim to fame is they are what's called the gold medal crew. And the gold medal crew, because of the rescue of the Calumet. And what happened was that the Calumet, and I knew I had the picture in there, the Calumet was a cargo vessel, and it was headed from Milwaukee. It was in Milwaukee, and it sprung a leak. And in the process of this leak, they decided they'd go to Chicago for repairs. Well, they didn't make it. They got as far as Highland Park, and the ship sank and started breaking apart. They notified the life-saving service, and the lifesavers put the lifeboat on board the Northwestern train, then took that lifeboat up here to Highland Park. From Highland Park, the train station, they took it over to the Moraine Bluff, which is where the old Moraine Hotel used to be. Well, they had a problem. They're up on top of the bluff, and they have to go all the way, the 100 feet or the 90 feet down, how to get that lifeboat down through the woods. And Fort Sheridan had just opened, so a bunch of the soldiers and the lifesavers actually cut down trees and built a road through about 3-foot, 4-foot snowdrifts to get this thing down, get the lifeboat down, and they had to go out 3 or 4 times and did manage to rescue the entire crew.
Oh, that
and
was great.
For this, the federal government issued a thanks to the crew by awarding a gold medal. It's the only life-saving crew on the Great Lakes that was ever awarded a gold medal for a rescue.
Wow.
And these were all just college students on their
that's so nice.
standby time. So the life-saving service existed up until the Coast Guard. They were the precursor of the Coast Guard. So from 1870, I think it was 1874, somewhere 1872, somewhere in there, up until 1915. They were always the students.
Oh.
And actually, I did find one group of pictures of the life-saving service from the students themselves in action, actually at a rescue. And that was at the Boston, the ship the Boston, that ran aground right off Kenilworth. And Dorothy Sears was the woman who took the photograph. She was the daughter of the founder of the village of Kenilworth, Joseph Sears.
Yeah. See, I'd love to tell everyone that by reading this, you're going to recognize some of the areas just by hearing where they are, and you'll know exactly where they are. Can we see a map? You have a map showing the extent of the
Well,
whole...
they have the map.
we'll see 'em as soon as we can. We'll show you a map of this. Here it is, like that.
I have it here. We can do it that way. But the area that I cover is roughly from Evanston to Waukegan. And in truth, more people have died on the Great Lakes.
Oh, here it is. Look
Yeah.
at that. Thank you.
So I'm covering from Evanston to Waukegan, and more people actually died in the waters, in those waters, than any other place on the entire Great Lakes.
That
You
is...
can't count the Eastland, because the Eastland wasn't on the lakes, it was in the river.
Okay.
They call it a Great Lakes disaster, but it's not really a Great Lakes disaster because they were on the river, and even at that time, which was 1915, the river flow had been reversed. So technically that was going to the Mississippi, not to the lake. They had to go through the locks to get out on
So
the
it's
lake.
it's a tricky currents, deep ravines.
Well, for
high-
rescue, it's very difficult. That unlike Chicago or someplace like that, a Calumet or Gary, where there's safe harbor. There's no safe harbor here.
That's it.
And the other problem is that it's shallow because of the current. There's actually a unique current off the North Shore. It splits at Glencoe, and there's a south group, a south flow from Glencoe that goes down into what's called Grosse Pointe, where the lighthouse is, which is why they put the lighthouse there, because there's this sandy, rocky shoal that extends out from there. And that's what that lighthouse is there to warn.
Oh, I want to talk about the lighthouse, because there were ships that called it their godsend, right, once it was there. I mean,
Well, it was a godsend because they didn't have radio, they didn't have, navigational aids are the buoys that are out in the lake that might be ringing, that you might be able to hear, or the lighthouse to know that you're close to shore. It can be a help. It can also cause you problems if you don't know which lighthouse it is that you're looking at.
oh,
As happened in a number of cases. There was one in 1905, the German, which was a big ore freighter, and he looked out his windows, what was left of his windows. He had just come through a nasty storm, and he thought he saw the lighthouse, and he thought it was the Chicago Harbor light. In fact, it was the Grosse Pointe light.
Oh.
So he's off by about 15
I
miles,
see what you mean.
and he landed up firm and secure on the shoal in Glencoe, and they had to take all this cargo out, and some of it was dumped in the lake. You could still look and find bits and pieces of it in order to get it off the shoal. Then there's the case of the James H. Reed. The James H. Reed was a big ore freighter, about a 7,000, 8,000 ton ore freighter, and he again mistook the Grosse Pointe lighthouse for the Chicago light, and he landed up on Grosse Pointe. The interesting thing about the James H. Reed was it was literally sliced in two in fog in the 1940s during the war, and sunk with the loss of about, I think, all hands.
So I see what you mean. It could be a godsend, but if you don't know where it is,
Well,
oh boy.
in the times, radio telephone communication wasn't required on ore freighters, on non-passenger carrying ships in the Great Lakes until 1954.
Okay.
So there was literally, you went out of harbor and you were on your own. And if you happened to get caught in a storm like the big blow of 1913, that one, there were hurricane force winds, 100, 110 mile an hour winds, that blew for 8, 12 hours. A hurricane will generally run about 3-4 hours of hurricane force winds. This ran for 12 hours with 40, 50, and 60 foot seas. And here you are on a 500-foot ore freighter in a small 25 horsepower, 3,000 horsepower engine. Chances aren't very good.
Wow.
And then there's the 1941 storm, which is called the Armistice Day Storm. And that one sank a number of boats on the east side of the lake because Lake Michigan is a giant bathtub, 22,400 square mile bathtub. So you get a slap action that slaps to the east shore and slaps back. So when you get a northeast wind, that's why we get big waves here, because what it's doing is it's slapping the lake. And the reason that the waves keep on coming is because the lake is a short lake, narrow. So you get this constant wave action, and the waves are much shorter and have a much greater chop to them. People that are used to the ocean invariably get seasick here because they can't handle that short chopping up and down action. And actually vessels have not been able to handle it. There have been cases where you have a monumental sea like that. So you've got a 30-foot sea, but it's a short sea. So you have the front end supported in the water, the back end supported, the middle, where all the cargo is unsupported. That's why you have a natural give and take, but even that, if you've got a high enough sea, and there are cases of ships literally in eyesight of other vessels just snapping in half.
Oh my gosh.
And going down because of the unsupported. For our area, for what the book is really dealing with, well, what is more likely, most of these accidents were caused by being too close to shore or having the weather push them onto the beach or onto the shoals, the sandy shoals in the bottoms. Yeah. Those are the types of accidents. And there are a lot of them. There's also the story of the George Morley. That vessel is still there off Evanston. And the boat caught fire. And he brought it to shore to rescue the crew, but he let the ship burn. In fact, the fire department was able to string hoses out to it to try to fight the fire, and the captain of the ship said, "This is my boat, get off my boat, you're not allowed."
Wow.
And he let it burn to the waterline. And that vessel is still there, and you can see it there.
It's visible, or you have
It is visible.
Oh my, okay.
In the right weather.
Yeah,
It's still
okay.
it's still visible there.
Oh, interesting.
What's interesting to note is that captain, I talked about the big blow, 1913, he had a big ore freighter. His company rewarded him by giving him a big ore freighter. And without even closing his hatch covers, the cargo holds, he turned around and went out into the lake. And that was the last they saw of him and that ship. That ship sank within 20 minutes of his leaving safe harbor.
Wow. I know there are many interesting accounts of bravery and so on. Was it Captain Lawson, or who was the one that really went out there to save a woman? And I forgot where that was. Is that? Oh, he's with the Evanston Life Saving Service, right?
Yeah,
Lawson.
Lawson was the captain of the Life Saving Service all
Okay,
the way
I got
up
him mixed
until
up with another
1912.
captain.
I think you're thinking of the story of Robert Hannah.
Yes. Tell us about that.
I won't say he was a heroic person.
Okay.
He was. This is a humorous story.
Okay, we can use that.
At the time, Northwestern University insisted that the male students and the female students could not be together unchaperoned.
Okay.
And these two decided to defy the rules, and the way they decided they were going to defy the rules is they were going to take a sailboat out, and that way they could be out in the lake by themselves, and no one could say anything until they came ashore.
That's clever.
Well, a storm came up, and the lifesaver who was on duty looked and saw this vessel and saw the storm coming and was worried. So he came down and looked again, and he couldn't see the sailboat. So he got into his rowboat, the life-saving boat, and rowed out to where he had last seen them. And because he still didn't see them, then what he did was he let the boat drift, because the idea being that you drift and you're going to drift to the same spot where they were.
They are.
Unfortunately, he waited too long to put the oars back in. So when he ended up drifting, he ended up drifting all the way out into the lake.
Oh, God.
And he was out in the middle of the lake, and a steamer happened by, the Arthur Orr, which is named for an Evanstonian. And the Arthur Orr picked him up and said, we'll take you to safety, but our next port of call is Milwaukee. So they took the lifesaver to Milwaukee. In the meantime, now the rest of the lifesaving crew comes down and goes, "Where's Robert Hanneman? Where's our lifeboat? He must be out in the lake rescuing somebody." "Well, let's take the second boat out and go get him." So they go out and they start looking and looking and looking, and they can't find him. So they said, "Well, I guess we've lost a lifesaver here." They lowered their little flag, little ensign to half staff, and rowed back to the life-saving station, who should be standing there waving at him, going, "Hey guys, where have you been?" Or Robert Hanneman, because he had boarded the train and gotten a free ride home to Evanston from Milwaukee. So I mean,
that's a happy ending. But there were some sad ones too. There were
everyone talks about the Christmas tree ship, which was the Royal Simmons. But his brother was also in that very same trade. And he died in 1898 on his ship off Glencoe.
Oh.
And they, again, the ship, that time they saw it. There were people on shore who saw it and sort of knew what happened. They sort of suspected what happened. They knew what happened when later in the day they found all these cut Christmas trees washing up on the beaches at Hubbard Woods and Glencoe.
Oh my, that is funny. So anyway, what other accounts should we mention, because we only have a short time left, that you think might be interesting to tell our people out there?
Well, there's the airplane.
Oh yes, of course. The one airplane that we...
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that one, now they seem to think that the cause of it was that the pilot didn't read the altimeter.
Oh, and we have a picture up, everyone.
Yeah,
look at that.
that's that is a photograph of the type of plane that went down. It crashed right off Highland Park. He was making his approach into O'Hare, and they seem to think that what he did was that they had an old-time altimeter, and it was very difficult to read the altimeter, and he just crashed into the lake I think it was about 15 miles off Highland Park. But
when was this again? Do you remember?
1965, I believe.
65, okay. So
a lot of people, I'm sure, remember that.
Yeah, so we have these wrecks, and then we have this one airplane. And
well, actually, there are more airplanes.
Oh, there were more.
Because during the 1940s, during the World War II, there were 2 aircraft carriers.
Oh.
They were converted passenger ships. They took the passenger cabins off, laid decks. In fact, one of them was the first one with a metal deck. First aircraft carrier ever with a metal deck. And they practiced touch landings on to learn how to land on aircraft carriers on those. And needless to say, there were all kinds of times when the pilots, because they were new and didn't know how to deal with it, would miss and dump themselves and their planes in. And they're finding these planes all over all the P-38s and all kinds of things all over the lakes. And there's actually a submarine a German World War I submarine
Oh, there you go, a
off
submarine.
the Great Lakes. Off Great Lakes Naval Base. And what's interesting to note on that one, that was sunk as part of the Treaty of Versailles. And so they had to take it and sink it in deep water. So they took it out off Great Lakes, and 2 ships fired at it and sank it. So there is a World War I German submarine out there. What's interesting to note is one of the ships that did that was what was the Eastland. It was converted into a naval training vessel, the USS Wilmette. It was down at the Naval Armory in Chicago at the end of Randolph Street for many years. And it was used as one of the 2 ships to sink a submarine. So it actually sank a submarine.
So we have a submarine, an aircraft, and this is very, very interesting. Let's see, besides, there was one other thing I wanted to mention, and that was the I can't remember now, I think it was life-saving thing, but it was a new thing they had started on to help the water, put out fires, I think. That was the other thing I wanted to mention, I forgot.
Well, there are always different types of technology. Today, the types of things that cause the type of wrecks, the weather doesn't change, but the ability to forecast an impending storm, get off the lake, it's an impending storm, the type of motive power that's available, GPS navigation, radar and sonar, so forth. As recently as 1975, in the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, the cause was the failure of electronic equipment. The weather doesn't change. What changes is our ability
to handle,
to be prepared for what does occur.
I guess we almost have to go now. I can't believe the time went by. We have 1 minute. We want to thank you so much for getting our attention to this wonderful account of all the different.
The reason I did it is it's local history, and people should know their local history. It's far more fascinating